Welcome down to Homefront. I'm Jeff Dudan. If you started your first business at the age of 4 selling cotton balls and became a business junkie, practically running a ski resort at the age of 16, sold your first business in your 20s, and then started Apple Tree Answers and grew it to 650 employees before selling it, growing it by 24 acquisitions, and today run a Line 5, a full circle consultancy helping thousands of founders grow, thrive, and successfully exit to become the one who changes their family's future. Your name can only be John Ratliff. Welcome.
Hey, Jeff, how are you? Sounds way cooler when you say it. I lived it. It didn't seem that cool, but I like hearing it.
No, man, it's when the scabs heal and the blood stops dripping and you know, it's like, I imagine it's like having a child. Once you have the child, you forget how painful it was to deliver it.
That's what I've heard.
That's what I've heard.
We're not allowed to say that though, right? That's just for moms.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's not it's the last thing I say that we'll have to edit. We don't edit anything, John. We just let it roll.
Let it roll.
I'm
all for that.
Opening question. Why do business owners sometimes sell their businesses that they've worked their entire lives to build for less than they are actually worth?
It's a great question because it's happening every minute of every hour of every single day.
Yes.
And I think most of the time it's because they don't know what they don't know. And there's an interesting fallacy in business where you learn everything there is to learn about sales and marketing and culture and management and leadership. And like we do, there's thousands of books written every year on how to operate companies, right? You can't walk through a Barnes and Noble without seeing thousands of them, but there aren't many books written on how to exit a company. And I think, it's created this really lopsided marketplace where sellers, particularly private equity, they've kind of led the charge, but sellers in general have been able to create an outweighted advantage over buyers have created an outweighted advantage over unsuspecting sellers. A decent sized private equity company might buy 10 to 15 companies a year. Big private equities buying, 50 to 100. As an entrepreneur, you might sell one or two in a lifetime. And, the analogy we give, it's, I always have to change the golfer, but I'll use Tiger Woods. It's like you found your grandfather's golf clubs up in the attic and you show up at the course having never played golf before, but you've watched it on TV a few times and, you get to the first tee and there's Tiger Woods. Well, who's going to win in that scenario? The same thing's happening in entrepreneurs trying to sell companies. They've never done it before. And they think, well, I watched it on TV. I know how to do it. And, it really creates a mismatch. There's a reason that, and again, I'll pick on private equity a little bit. There's a reason private equities compounded at 20% annual return for a couple of decades. They're not overpaying for businesses. In fact, in many cases, they're, in my view, and I'm an opinion of one, but they're underpaying relative to what they're really worth. So that's probably the number one driver.
You make your money when you buy.
Yeah, exactly. And there's normally, and again, the well-run firms, there's normally a thesis about who they're going to sell to 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And they've already even made that decision. So yeah, they're looking to buy based on a strategy that they've created, but that strategy is really predicated on who the ultimate buyer of the company is going to be. And when you know all those things, it's easy to create scenarios where you have all the leverage and you have an outweighed advantage relative to the entrepreneur selling the company. So,
well, when people go to start a business, there's some classical questions. First one, who is the customer and where can we find them? And what problem are we solving? So there's some customer questions. Then it's, Mark Cuban hates this question when, what's the size of the market? When somebody comes in, oh, this is a $42 billion market. Like he says, I'm out. immediately I'm out if you're talking about the size of the market. But what is the size of the market? I've gone down the path before where I didn't do that early enough. And then I realized that it just wasn't that big of a market that we were trying to build into and probably wasn't worth the investment. But the third question, which nobody asks, and I learned this from a McKinsey guy, was who is the ideal owner for this business? And, if you start with that, because strategically, people are, well, we're going to add this, or we're going to add this service line or this product line, but you might make your offering overly broad and unintentionally lose 50% of your available buyers because now you're competing with them or some other thing. So, building a business for a specific outcome and for a specific buyer persona is, that's advanced.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. So we think about and we do this in M&A, but we kind of think about this now as sort of in general. But when you contemplate really how a company is constructed and what it consists of, we can boil that all the way down to every company is a collection of assets and capabilities. And they use their capabilities with the set of assets that they've been able to acquire or create. And they leverage those assets through capabilities to create outcomes. That's as pure and simple as we can think about it. And if you look at it from that frame and you think about, all right, who might the buyers for this business be? You can start doing some calculus around, okay, what specifically about this set of assets and capabilities would buyer A value, would buyer B value, would buyer C value? And in many cases, those are different things. So, and I always, I love to go back to examples, and we look at the Whole Foods Amazon transaction, right? And in hindsight, it looks obvious, but at the time, Amazon really got called into question about that acquisition. Why in the world the company that literally disintermediated brick and mortar is going to go back and buy a brick and mortar? But then you start to boil it down to assets and capabilities, and you look at Whole Foods. Well, one of their key assets was all their physical locations. One of the things that Amazon really lacked was physical presence to interact with customers. And again, in hindsight, it's obvious, but what was the biggest constraint for Amazon? Their whole brand promise was, we want it to be an easy experience. Well, it wasn't easy to return stuff. You had to print a label and find a UPS store or FedEx and all of a sudden overnight, they were able to take the entire footprint of Whole Foods and create a return capability that they didn't have the day before. So if you look at Whole Foods through the lens of a grocery store chain, they're going to get valued like the rest of the market. 4% net income, probably going to trade at something between 8 and 10 times that number, and, a relatively discounted valuation. But you look at it through Amazon's lens, and all these assets and all these capabilities at Whole Foods could be unlocked in a way at Amazon that you couldn't unlock anywhere else. So all of a sudden, the valuation massively shifts. And we see that even in relatively small size transactions. You'll get 3 buyers, and our process is we love to get buyers to go from, we'd like to own this business to we'd love to own this business. And then if we can get 2 or more kind of well-resourced buyers to say, we have to own this business because it fits our strategy, because it fills out our geography, because we need this customer list or access to this, manufacturing capability, whatever it is. You get 2 deep-pocketed buyers that say, we have to own this business. All of a sudden, you can throw all the industry average multiples out the window. Valuation becomes relative to the value that can be unlocked by the buyer. The problem is, not a lot of advisors and not a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking about it that way. They see it through the industry multiple lens. Like, oh, I'm in the XYZ industry. That trades at 5 to 8. And if I get 8 times EBITDA, I'm thrilled because I was at the upper end. But if you get a have-to-have buyer, you could be at 20, 30, 100 times EBITDA because that specific buyer can unlock value in a way nobody else can. And it really kind of turns things around. Now, it's a lot harder to do M&A that way, right? You're casting a
Right.
wider net, you're having longer conversations, you're helping buyers see the world strategically. It's a lot of extra work, but the outcomes are often, exponentially better than industry average. So that's kind of how we think about starting it with the end in mind, but thinking about the assets and capabilities from the buyer's end in mind, and every buyer's going to value different things in different ways.
I've been to your website, Align 5, and I'd love to understand the scope of services that you provide there, because it appears as if you are you're a consultancy that may be grounded inside of the scaling up methodology by Vern Harnish, that you engage with founder owners to increase capabilities in their business, to scale their businesses, and then it looks like you stand alongside them in the sales process. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. So I actually co-owned with Vern. I was the majority stakeholder, the Scaling Up Coaches
Okay.
organization for the
Okay.
last 7 years. We exited our position just in February of this year. So
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're deeply rooted in that methodology, and it doesn't have to be the scaling up methodology per se, but I mean, as you know, coming out of franchising, having an operating model that is scalable and repeatable is one of the fastest shortcuts to success in business. If you wake up every day and you have to figure it out from scratch, that's a whole heck of a lot harder than if you wake up every day and you improve and perfect on an already optimized operating model. So yeah, we see the world through that, through that mindset that it doesn't have to be scaling up, but it has to be something. And when we think about it, we wake up, our purpose at Align 5, and my purpose is to wake up every day in service to entrepreneurs. And we think about the entrepreneurial journey as a full circle. So, you start up and then you figure some stuff out and you start to scale and then rapidly scale. And then you've kind of got a mature business that you've optimized. Then you start contemplating, exit, whatever that means. That might mean passing it on to your kids or your employees or selling it to someone else. Then you go through the transaction and then you have a whole life kind of post transaction. If you think about that like a full circle, our deal is we'll meet you wherever you are on that circle, and we'll have resources for you to help you kind of along that journey and along that path. We're not the world's greatest with startups. We certainly can help startups, but our passion is really in the scaling up, contemplating exit, post-exit side of the world. And that's what Align 5 is about.
You built a company called Apple Tree Answers, and you did that. You started with 2 people, I think, out of an apartment, and then somehow, at a ripe young age, you started doing acquisitions. And this question is heading towards, when did you first learn finance? And so you did 24 acquisitions, and through that time, you're paying multiples of 3 to 5. In 2012, you exited that business with 650 employees at a 15 plus multiple. So I don't know what the EBITDA was, but it was probably a life-changing event for many people on your team and exit. But like, what happens so much, and even today, like, I understand that I have to have great finance people around me, and I don't think founders really understand that finance, it's a foreign language, and if you wade into those waters and you try to negotiate on basic terms, that there are 50 gotchas inside of that the private equity people are manufacturing, and whether that's a preference on first money in or all of these types of things that change the equation. It changes the value equation, and you have to have a pretty comprehensive toolkit to handle a deal really of any size. How did you cut your chops in finance, and when did you really make an awareness like this is really where the money's made, in addition to creating a great business and a great operating business and a great culture and competitive advantage inside of a business? Like, you can blow it all with bad finance.
Yeah, 100%. And, in our kind of, and it's all anecdotal, but in the entrepreneurs that we come across and work with and have been around, I would say it's at least 7 or 8 out of 10 that really don't understand the financial statements of their business. Certainly, they kind of get P&L, but as soon as you get the balance sheet and cash flow statement, the blank stares start to come. Ironically, I was a finance major in college, which taught me absolutely nothing about finance other than to understand that the stock market's built on, imperfect information and trying to get an arbitrage on information. That was the extent of my finance degree in college. Probably the most meaningful class that I took as a business major was managerial accounting, but even that, and I got a D, so I got to take it twice, which was great. But even that kind of just gave the basic rundown. It's really getting your hands dirty and working through some sample transactions with, good finance resources that you start to connect the dots and put the pieces together. I can't agree more. And if anyone that's going to contemplate anything transaction-wise should have 2 things. I'll argue that you should have a good advisor, but that would probably be third on the list. I think you have to have an unbelievable finance resource, someone that can build a model and show you pre and post valuations, that can show you how cash flows in a business, how debt works, how equity versus debt financing is massively different in terms of the cost to the buyer. And I think you need a great lawyer too to get it structured the right way, because you're right. There are so many gotchas. And, again, I always go back to beating on private equity. But when private equity was first contemplated, the idea was, let's build centers of excellence, operational excellence, and help entrepreneurs operate companies better. Then they realized the arbitrage on that wasn't so great. So they've become unbelievably good at the financial engineering side of transactions. They've become unbelievably good at buying companies for significantly less than they're worth. And that can only be done through transaction structures and legal structures and really understanding the finance side. It's funny because one of the things we caution everyone against, so I'm going to give this blanket caution to anyone that's listening. There's this really seemingly innocuous thing that happens when you haven't thought about selling your company and somebody knocks on the proverbial door, sends the email, makes the phone call, whatever it is, and asks the very simple, hey, have you ever thought about selling this business? And the answer is always, no, we haven't, but, we'd be open to the idea. And that simple, exchange ends up leading most entrepreneurs down a pretty suboptimal path. And it normally goes something like, send us over an NDA, we'll get your financials, and we'll give you a rough idea what this business might be worth, which is the worst possible thing you could ever do. Number one, your financials aren't in an investor-ready form. Very likely they're not. Number two, all the stuff that you're running through the business, your car payment, maybe a vacation here or there, club membership, whatever it is, all that stuff's still in there. So now you've revealed an unbelievable amount of your personal financial situation that you would never want to do. And if that ends up being the buyer, and by the way, they're a sole source buyer, so they know there's no competitor. Like, it's a terrible way to proceed, but even if they're the right buyer, you're going to be beholden to that first set of financials you sent over forever. So if you ever get the call and you're like, yeah, maybe this makes sense, we'll contemplate it, push pause, get a finance resource, get the financials in an investor-ready form, try and get multiple people to the table. If you can't do that, I get it, but don't just fire off your, bookkeeper prepared QuickBooks financials and hope that you'll ever recover from whatever's in there that you wouldn't want somebody to see. Mm-hmm. So yeah, truly understanding how cash works in a business and how the financial statements work. It's a rare gift among entrepreneurs. Most of them look at their bank account, and if the number's going up, it's good. If it's going down, it's bad. And that's the extent of their knowledge. So don't feel bad for not knowing. Feel bad for not taking the time to put the resources around you that can really help you understand. I think it's one of the most critical, underappreciated skills for entrepreneurs.
Fair enough. I sold a business that I built for nearly 25 years. And I was messing around with a couple of inbound acquirers and doing exactly what you just said. I knew that I would run a process, but I was just having conversations, and I hadn't come to terms that I was actually going to exit the business at that point in time. So the CEO of this company that we had been talking to for months flew in, and we went to a dinner, and literally when he threw, and I had an inkling of what the business was worth, and he threw a number at me, and he was almost like, how about it'd be like this? Like, I'm like, man, your lip's not supposed to quiver when you give the price. I mean, I know, like, that is, and within 12 months, I sold the business for 5 times that number. Yeah. And it's just like, I mean, I would have, but many people would have taken that number because honestly, it would have been a life-changing amount of money. I mean, it would have been fine. I mean, other than the fact that you would have left, 80% of it on the table.
Yeah.
But it happens to people. It happens to people all the time.
Jeff, it's happening. It's happening like someone probably just inked a contract in the last 30 seconds that it happened. And yeah, when you wake up and realize what you left on the table, even if you got a life altering amount, it sits with you for a while. Yeah. And unfortunately, your story, you got 5 times more. I can't tell you how many times that same number gets thrown out, and ultimately the entrepreneur gets 1/5 of that number, or 1/3, or half, or even 75%. Oftentimes the opening number is the North Star, and you end up working down from that number, which is even more tragic. So, yeah, it really is an unlevel.
Yeah. So I lead a brand builder summit for a certain emerging franchisors, and I bring my deal book out, and it's probably like 12 inches of paper, right? It's like that. And then I say, I ask the question on the screen. It says, when you ultimately go to sell this business, what's more important, price or terms? How would you answer that question?
Terms. 1,000% terms. Well, I literally was having this conversation an hour ago with a friend of mine who's sort of a client. The axiom is my price, your terms, your price, my terms. And, so many times we lock in on, no one ever says I sold my business for this cash at close and this earnout. And then we always say I sold it for X, and we get enamored by X. And as soon as you get enamored by X, the buyer has all the power, because they're going to help you get to X through their, flavor of terms. And many times those terms are not in your favor. So I'll give you 2 transactions. You can sell your business for 50 million and you get a cash at close, or you can sell your business for 80 million and it's 20 million cash at close and 60 million in some flavor of variable comp earnout. Well, if I just said 80 versus 50, you're going to take 80 all day long. But if I tell you 50 versus 20 at close and 60 over some, uncertain future, of course you're going to take, well, depends on what your confidence is in that uncertain future, but the terms matter way more than the number in both of those scenarios. And the way to think about it is, whatever you walk away from the deal table with is the amount that you can relatively comfortably agree you're going to hold on to. Now, this is why you need good lawyers. You don't even always get to hold on to everything you walked away with the deal table with, but at least they have
back. They'll claw it back.
At least they have to pry that out of your cold, dead hands to get it back, versus they've got the pen and the checkbook to decide if they're going to pay it going forward.
They'd have to come to Thailand to take mine.
Yeah. And, one of the things we'll do with an entrepreneur contemplating an exit is we take them through a deal vision exercise. So, and this is something everybody listening can do. Sit down and come up with the entire list of all your have-to-haves. What has to be true on the closing day for you to say, yes, I'm willing to put the ink on the paper, and build that list. And in our advice, if you're going to waver from it, be really, really thoughtful about giving up on a must-have or a have-to-have on the list. So we'll call it need to have, must-have on one column, and then nice to have in the other column. So yeah, it'd be nice if they kept the brand. It'd be nice if my employees get 2-year employment agreements. It'd be nice if this, it'd be nice if that. And know what those things are, but get really clear on what has to be true for you to continue down the path and say yes. Because invariably, what happens is, my joke as an advisor is, it's 20% advisors, it's 80% psychologists.
Yeah.
Because the psychology, you're on a roller coaster. It takes a year, 9 months, a year, 15 months to get a transaction done. And you'll have moments where you're like, this is the greatest thing that's ever going to happen to me. And you'll have other moments like, this is an utter nightmare. It's never going to get done. And it's in those moments where you're in the nightmare mode that you're really vulnerable to getting retraded by an unscrupulous buyer. And if you've been really clear on what has to be true for you to go forward, in those uncertainty moments, you have a lot of things to anchor to. If you don't, you really run the risk of getting taken advantage of. And I hate to be all doom and gloom, because it should be a happy moment selling your company, but this is through watching hundreds of transactions go wrong and see all the different points where, entrepreneurs get their unsuspecting sellers get totally taken by very, very sharp and calculated buyers.
Yeah. And unscrupulous, there's many different flavors on that spectrum. So one thing I've observed, some people will try to negotiate an earnout with you, but you're no longer running the company. So how whose control is it that this earnout is hit or not hit, or going to be sandbagged or whatever? There's no language that you can put in there, best efforts or anything else, that where they're going to, if it's material, they're going to hit that earnout. They're going to go right up to that 12 months and come in underneath it. And then, so you, like you said, if you're comfortable with getting what you're getting, walk away from the table, then that's the deal. And then I heard there's one horror story from a YPO guy, that, sold the business for some, let's just say $15 million, and got it was trying to get out. He needed to get out of the business, and took $3 or $4 million down. And the day after they closed, was hit with like a 500-page lawsuit by the buyer, challenging everything that they had given them. And they fought for the next 3 years and spent $2 million and ended up with nothing. And then once you find out that, now there was a bunch of people laying in wake of that company that had done it, but they had all signed NDAs and couldn't, so there was nothing that you could have known. But I think, like, understanding who's buying, and it's not like, that's an extreme example, but even fund life, right? Let's just say that you're selling, you've run a process, and you've got two people at the end of the line, and maybe one's $3 million higher than the other one, and they're both going to let you roll back as much as you want to roll back, but one is coming to the end of their fund life, and the other one is in the beginning of their fund life. So, from a perspective of, okay, well, I can take $3 million today, and let's say I roll back $10 million, but they're going to resell that business inside of a year. So how much am I going to make on that 10 versus rolling that $10 million back into the second deal? And if they're acquisitive and they're doing things that are accretive and they're investing in the bit, you're going to get a longer ride. You might get a 5X on that $10 million versus a 30%. So, I mean, that's, and I don't, advisors would probably have to be careful in that situation, because nobody can really tell the future. And they have to just say, look, here's this, and here's what we see, and here's this, and here's what we see. But for all you know, is that second company makes a bunch of bad acquisitions and they stumble through it. I mean, you can't really tell, but I mean, there are things that would give you more information that would not be something that a founder would really think of going through their first exit.
Yeah. Well, and the safe assumption is always that the future goes to zero. And if the future went to zero, would you still be satisfied with giving up the economic engine that was supporting you and your family based on what you got at close. And in the vast majority of these big earnout style structures, the answer is no. So now you're to your point, you're beholden on somebody else in an operating control position crafting and creating your future for you. And it really creates a lot of misalignment. Back to the YPO example, there are a couple things you can, and think about them like trial balloons that you can float out there that I always love to know the cards people have in their hands. And there's some subtle ways you can get at least some tells from buyers to see how they're thinking. And there's a provision called an anti-sandbagging clause, which basically says anything that you discovered in diligence, you can't call back after the fact and say, hey, this wasn't right, that wasn't right. And anyone that pushes really hard against an anti-sandbagging clause may have some designs on sandbagging you after the close. So it's not about that clause is going to protect you per se. It's about, I want to see the reaction when we float that trial balloon. And if there's an allergy to it, I want to gauge the level of allergic reaction to see, is this something that maybe they're contemplating? And there are little kind of things like that you can do. On the earnout front, one of the things you can contemplate, and this one, I've pulled it off a handful of times. It's harder to get done, but again, it's a tell, and it'll tell you how the buyer's thinking. You look at EBITDA as the most common metric to measure earnouts by. It's also the easiest thing to game the system on.
Manipulate. Absolutely.
Easy. Yeah. The harder one is gross margin. And I'm in the middle of a negotiation literally right now where we're contemplating an earnout and cherry on top of the Sunday earnout, but we're gonna base it on the gross margin of the business. Way harder to gain gross margin. Now, buyers will tell you how they think about earnouts by their reaction to the trial balloon of let's base the earnout on gross margin. If they're vehemently allergic to it, there's a really good chance that they're good at gaming the system around EBITDA to not pay earnouts. If they're open to the idea, but they want a little bit more detail, then maybe that's a different tell. And if they're totally open to the idea, then they're really looking at it as a partnership, in my opinion. So there are some.
Can I ask a question? So the gross margin, would that be on percentage gross margin, or would that be on actual dollars contributed in gross margin? I would think it would have to be the latter.
Yeah, typically the latter. The idea being that, you're, and this is one of the great paradoxes in M&A, you're valuing the business based on the past, trailing 12 months, and I want to see your historical financials. But really, you're buying some future expectation. You're buying a future state of the business. Gross margin is probably the most accurate measure to determine if you got to that future state or not. You may make a growth-oriented decision around reinvesting some of those margin dollars in marketing or whatever it is that would have a short-term effect on EBITDA and the bottom line, but you're not going to damage gross margin. You may trade, future top line revenue for gross margin accretion. And, that's when you can make the argument, hey, we should be basing this on the percentage of revenue side, but that's going to be a little bit harder to pull off. I think gross margin dollars collected is the easiest, most accurate, and probably most fair way to think about, did you get the value you wanted in the future or not?
John, I'd like to shift over to your build of Apple Tree Answers and specifically about some of the lessons learned around culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, as the story goes, you've got the top line, you've got the bottom line, and you've got the front line. And the front line is where all the interaction is. For us as a franchisor, our front line is our 70 corporate employees here at the home office. Almost everybody touches the franchisees in one way or another. And that's our front line. And then the front line of our franchisees is their customers, their end user customers. And it's the people that are interacting with those end user customers. So I think we have kind of we're fighting a two frontline war here. And, what are some of the things that you learned in growing this business? It was over 18 years to 650 employees. Where did you stumble? What did you learn? And where did you end up with it?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. In 2000, and I think it was 2008, maybe, our frontline turnover was about 115%. So for every frontline employee, we were hiring more than one frontline employee a year. And interestingly, we had a core group of about 50% of those that never turned over. And the other 50% we turned over like 2 or 3 times a year. So we had like a really aligned, sort of loyal group of frontline employees. And then we just, and part of it was hiring, part of it was our culture.
Was it by location though? Like these locations didn't turn over and these did?
It was sort of by location. Yeah, for sure. And, when we looked at every metric there was to look at, and we ultimately landed on net promoter score for the frontline employees. And that's how we knew how effective our managers were, how happy their employees were. And that was, the biggest key to keeping them. I know it sounds like rocket science, but, the biggest key to driving turnover down was really, we challenged every salaried employee in the company every day to ask themselves, what can we do today to make the employee experience better than it was yesterday? I think brands especially, but, I think companies in general get it wrong. They spend all this money externally to create a brand expectation with customers. They don't spend any internally to get their employees to fall in love with their brand. And then they have emergency meetings trying to figure out why they can't deliver on their brand promises to customers and why employees really aren't aligned around the brand promises. I think you should do it the opposite way. And this is what made Starbucks so successful early on. They spent all their marketing dollars internally to get their team to fall in love with the idea that was Starbucks, health insurance and all the things that they did. And customers came through word of mouth because it was a remarkable experience to go to Starbucks. Starbucks advertising budget early on was really insignificant because they spend so much on employee engagement. And I still feel that way, that, we have to think about that customer interface piece as the most important link in the value creation chain of a business. And so for us in the call center world, it was interesting. We would buy a company and oftentimes they'd be in like class C office space. And we didn't really do a lot of class A and A plus, but we were all class A minus or B plus at the worst. So we had to move a lot of these companies that we bought, and we would bring in a space planner, and every single space planner we ever worked with wanted to put all the management offices where the windows were around the outside and put the call center kind of floor with cubicles internal with no windows. And we used to say, no, it's the opposite. Figure out the best views, the best real estate, the best space inside this new office. We're going to put the frontline people there, and then we'll figure out where to put everybody else. The number of times I got into arguments with space planners, like, that's just not how it's done. You don't understand it. Like the subtle differences of putting, and you could call it servant leadership, call it whatever you want, but the subtle difference of making the frontline employee the most important, and I hate calling an employee an asset, but your employees really are part of your assets. The most important asset inside a business to me is so fundamental, I would never be talked out of it, but it is certainly not the norm. We did a whole kind of, one of the things that would happen, we'd buy a company and all the frontline people were sitting in the worst office chairs you've ever seen, right? The wheel fell off of one and the arms are unlevel, and like they're 8 hours a day trying to type on a keyboard where all the letters have been worn off. And so one of the first things we would do is we would go in and upgrade all the technology and the office chairs and everything for the frontline. And invariably, management team would be like, what about us? Well, you know what? We're like, you'll get to sit on whatever, the best of the crap that's left over is for you. Your job is to take all the rocks out of the river for the frontline and make their experience as easy and seamless as possible. Unless you want to sit there for 8 hours a day and answer the phone and serve our customers, your job, they're our internal customers, the frontline employee, and your job as a leader here is to do anything you possibly can to improve the experience of our customer, which is the frontline employee. And it took a while for us to kind of get that mindset right. But once we did, turnover went from 115 to like 18%. It changed everything in the business. But
very, very subtle, but significant.
Yeah.
Sends a strong message.
It does. And it changes the level of empathy. I always, we had a program called Dream On. You touched on it a little bit when we were prepping for this. But I want you to imagine this scenario where you have a frontline employee and your CFO, and they're both driving to the same office on the same roads to get to work. And there's a pothole on the road. And the frontline employee hits the pothole and gets a flat tire. And maybe they're a $20 an hour frontline employee. So they're paid okay, but, not great. They hit the pothole. Like, that's a crisis, right? They don't have AAA. They don't have roadside assistance.
Right.
This is their only car, whatever it is. They don't have the cash in the bank. So now they have to get a new tire. They're late to work because they had to find a friend to pick them up, all the things. And they get to work and they sit down and you say, well, before we start, this is the third time this month you've been late. We're going to have a verbal warning, and you got to sign off that we had this corrective action, and you've got 4 points. And if you get to 10 points, you're going to get fired. And we literally rain all over them right after they had this crisis. And then we tell them, what's the last thing we say after all that? After we rain all over them, we go, now go sit down, put a smile on your face, and serve our customer. The CFO hits the same pothole, same flat tire, calls Mercedes roadside assistance that comes and picks her up, drops her off at the office. We'll bring your car back when it's done. Don't worry, your warranty covers the tire. It was a non-event, and they're a half hour late, and they come in, and what do? That pothole, I hit that last week. Can I get you a cup of coffee? When are they going to fix that pothole? Yeah, that's terrible. We commiserate with the person that had the non-event, and we destroy the person that had the crisis. We have it all backwards.
Right.
The frontline employee, and I'm a big believer in the entrepreneur, and like I said, I wake up every day to be in service to entrepreneurs. But what a privilege as an entrepreneur that these people are showing up every day to turn our vision in the world into a reality. We owe them the greatest debt of gratitude of all time, and instead we do the opposite, and we treat them not always the best. And I have so many rants on this culture side. I always challenge entrepreneurs to pull out their employee handbooks, and I give them a highlighter if we start working with them on culture. I have them take their handbook, and I give them a highlighter, and I say, you need to sit down and read this, and I insert some expletives, handbook from beginning to end, and I want you to highlight everything in here that's in here to address the behavior of the bottom 10% or 20% of your team. So anything that's for the bottom 10%, highlight it. Jeff, every single time we have 110 pages and 90 of them are bright yellow.
Right.
That's how we run companies. We run companies in the least common denominator way. Well, if someone shows up at work with a gun, it better be in the handbook that's a no-no. Yeah, no kidding that you can't bring a gun to work. Putting it in the handbook, is that going to change someone's behavior or not? And what you do is when you hand that handbook to an A player, they get 110 pages of why you tolerate all this C player behavior at your place, so much so that you have to put it in your damn handbook that, don't be a C player, don't be a C player, don't be a C player. And it's totally upside down.
I just rewrote our handbook. You ready? Use common sense.
Yeah.
Be a decent human. Do your job.
Love it.
Sign it.
My version is we're all adults. If you act like an adult, we will treat you like an adult. And if you choose not to act like an adult, then you can work somewhere else. Like, that's it.
That's it.
Yours is even better.
We just went through this, because we have HR, we've got in-house counsel from the beginning, and the handbook came out, and then all this stuff got in there. And I'm just like, you're creating a culture of working a system within this set of rules that shouldn't even apply to an adult workplace. It's
Correct.
it's just a shame. Like, how big can a company get where you can still run it like I built my business? So here was my thing. And when I interviewed everybody, I would say, look, here's the deal. Here's our values. Which one resonates the most with you? We have CARES values: community, accountability, respect, excellence, and service. That was my values at the other company. That's our values here. If a franchise owner wants to build anything inside of those values, now I teach them, because your values break the ties. Your values give you a framework within which to handle difficult situations, whether that be a job that went wrong, whether that be an employee situation. But then if you want to build, there's a franchise business. If you want to build a faith-based business inside of that, have a set of principles. That's great. You want to build a veterans-based business. If you want to build a immigrant, like whatever it is, we've got a guy in from, where is he from? Ecuador today, and so everybody has their value, their principles that are authentic to them, that's going to help them attract people and keep people, to them inside of that. But like I would tell people when I hired them, I said, which one of our values resonates the most with you? You'll learn more from that question than any other question that you could have in an interview, because they'll tell you who they are and what matters to them and why, and they'll give you specific situation. You want to talk about a competency-based interview? Ask them to talk about their values and why, and when they proved it and applied to it. And then the second thing was, look, nothing gets in the way of serving our customers. And if you have a problem with another employee, you don't need to love them. You don't need to go out to eat with them. You don't need to go out to lunch with them, but you have to get to work together. And if anything, any little click or a silo happens because people don't want to make it hard for somebody else, you're going to go to lunch with that person and you're going to come back and tell me that it's good or who's leaving. And that was exactly it. And that worked for 25 years.
Yeah. And there's this fallacy that as we get bigger, we have to be more formal. And so Atlassian, they're a global 50 size software company based out of Australia.
Right.
When they were 30 employees, they created their 5 core values. They have the exact same 5 today with the exact same icons, the same video and how they teach new employees. And they're 20,000, 30,000 employees globally. They have the same 5 core values. So I do believe you can scale. Now, do you need more lawyers? Do you need more policy? You need all that stuff. But at the heart of it, the values don't have to change, in my view. For me, core values do, and I think it's one of the most important things you can do in a business. We can all find lots of successful companies that don't do core values well. We can all find lots of failed companies that don't do core values well.
Right.
It's really hard to find a company that's been a complete failure that nails their core values. It normally doesn't happen. So why not stack the deck in your favor? For me, core values do 3 things. Well, they do more than 3, but there's 3 kind of fundamental ways to think about core values. Invariably, and you talked about it being a tiebreaker, invariably employees have to make decisions when they have incomplete or nebulous information. They don't have all the facts. And their confidence takes a hit when they have to make those decisions in a vacuum or incomplete. And they can either run to you and ask you 1,000 questions and take all your time. Or if they have a really deeply adopted set of core values inside the company, they can anchor those decisions to a core value. So at least they have a defensible position. Hey, I know this went wrong, but here was the value I was thinking of, and here's why I made the decision. And now you can have a conversation about their thought process and the value. Number 2,
it's absence and presence, right? So I tell them, my owners, I say, you need a team of people that will make the same decisions in your absence as they would in your presence. You can't scale without it. You can't make every decision for people.
And the values are like the perfect way to set the stage for that.
Yes.
The second is it's a secret language. Like cares to you means something completely different than it means anywhere else on the planet. And the C for community means something very unique to you. You know, we had 7 core values at Appletree. I won't run through them all, but I'll give you one. We stole it from John Wooden. Be quick, but don't hurry.
Yeah.
That meant something to us that it didn't mean anywhere else on the planet. I sold the company in 2012. If I found one of my old employees on the street today and I said, hey, be quick, but don't hurry, they would know exactly what I meant because it was that specific. So that's number 2. And then the third, and I think this is maybe the most important part, the values can be the bad guy in the tough conversations.
Yeah.
So, you know, when something goes wrong or something breaks and you got to have one of those, what the bleep were you thinking conversations? Instead of what the bleep were you thinking, you can say, you know, we had one that was think like a customer. Hey, here's the scenario. Here's what happened. How do you think that lines up with think like a customer? I want you to just measure it against that value. And then any rational human being realizes, all right, yeah, I wasn't thinking like a customer at all. And now think like a customer is the bad guy. And we can have a dialogue about it instead of me feeling, you know, attacked and you pissed off that I didn't think like a customer in the first place. So that when done right, they're unbelievably powerful. And I'll take it one step further on your hiring process. So we were in the call center space. We were really getting it right on the culture side. And so we were getting when we had a new position open, we were getting tons of outside interest, but our employees were referring a lot of their friends and we were so overwhelmed with resumes and applications, we were doing a terrible job at responding. So imagine an employee who's so excited to refer one of their friends, and we don't even call that friend back for an interview. And now all of a sudden we're doing damage to our really happy employee. It was my sister-in-law. We banned the term HR. We call it the employee experience department. She ran the employee experience department. And so what she did was on our online application, every employee had to start with an online job application. The very first question was, these are the 7 core values at Appletree. Pick one of the 7 and tell us a story about how you live that value personally or professionally. And then this was the secret. In parentheses, it said optional. It was not optional. It was the fastest way to opt out of working for us was to skip the question. About 40% of the people just skipped it. So they were immediately eliminated.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That was a screen for will. They didn't even have the will to answer the question. So they were out. Then 60% would answer. We would read that first. And if the answer to the question didn't resonate, they were out. And they could have the perfect, and I'm sure we missed out on some decent candidates, but they could have the perfect resume, the perfect skill set, the perfect everything. If we read the answer to that question and thought, they were out. So instantly, we were only talking to applicants that we resonated with, first off, around values. It took our hiring efficacy probably 10x'd it. And we did top grading and all the things, but that simple move, and we did that out of desperation. We were getting 400 applicants for one call center job, which was impossible to screen. We were able to screen 70 or 80% of them just with that question. And then we could focus on the ones that really resonated with us. So just a subtle
powerful tools inside of a business. Living your values consistently is important. How did you use the Dream On program to really demonstrate care for your frontline?
Yeah. So essentially Dream On was just to set the stage for it. And again, most of the things we did came out of utter desperation. This was one of them. So we had a quarterly planning meeting. I was at a conference with a buddy of mine and ran a business in Canada, looked very similar to ours, a little bit smaller. And we were having a conversation about frontline turnover. And he asked, what's your voluntary frontline? And I said, we're about 115%. And he looked me dead in the eye. And this is a guy I respect a ton and great operator. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, that's fantastic. I was like, no, it's not fantastic. He goes, well, our industry average is like 200%. we're at 150 and I think we're doing well. You're better than we are at 115. And it's like, this is ridiculous. So it was time for quarterly planning. I went back and said, listen, this is our problem. We have to solve this. This is a problem. So one of our team members said, well, what if we had the Make-A-Wish charity model, but we did it internally for our team? And that turned into a series of conversations that turned into a program called Dream On. Dream On was the opportunity for every employee in the company with no restrictions to submit a dream. Something they, if they could wave a magic wand, what would they make happen? We ended up granting over 300 of them between when we launched the program in 2008 until we sold in 2012. And we actually stopped measuring the ROI because it was so good. It didn't matter to go from, we had 500 frontline employees when we sold. So imagine hiring whatever 115% is, 580 versus 18%, which is less than 100.
Right.
Even at an average cost of $5,000 to hire a frontline person, like, we're saving millions of dollars a year. Like, we couldn't grant enough dreams.
Yeah. What would be an example of one that was like a really small, simple one versus one that was more complex?
Yeah. So there's so many great ones. We had an employee in Puerto Rico who had written a book of Spanish poetry, and her dream was to get it published. So we published that. We got her a publisher, and we did 1,000 copies of her book. We had a mom whose daughter was in the Navy, and they couldn't afford to get her home for Christmas. She was based in San Diego. The mom was in Pensacola. And so we didn't tell the mom, but we surprised her with, I think we gave her at least a week. It might have been 2 weeks off of work. And we got her a place in San Diego and told her daughter, and she was in on it. And we bought her plane tickets, and we sent her to San Diego for Christmas, like unbeknownst to her. We bought a headstone, 2 of them actually, for 2 different employees that lost grandparents and they couldn't afford headstones. We hosted a 5th birthday party. We did a 40th anniversary party for someone's parents who I had never met. We must have sent 20 people on honeymoons and trips, and we had Amex points, and
right.
We forget as entrepreneurs this amazing network we've created, especially if you're YPO or EO or CEO, any of these organizations. Like, we had a kid that wanted to meet the guy that wrote Sim City, the software game Sim City from like the 90s, I guess. And we were able to get him to lunch with the creator of Sim City. Like, there were all, we bought cars and tires for cars, and it was really an across the board thing. We also did some pretty special things. We had an employee that there were some amazing stories. I can tell you a quick story. One of the things that came out of it that, like, still to this day, I half the time can't get through the story without like an emotional breakdown. But we had a kid who was the husband of one of the very first women that I ever hired. And it was probably, I hired her in 97 and this was 2008. So she had already been with us for quite some time. I hired her as an 18-year-old, right out of high school. And her husband got diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's. And it was September, and they basically said, you need to start getting your affairs in order. Very likely he won't be here at Christmas time. And, the 2 little kids, 6 and 8-year-old kids. And so the dream was his wife worked for us and his sister worked for us. So the sister, on behalf of the wife, she submitted a dream on behalf of this guy's wife to get him to one more NFL football game before he passed away. So I'm a season ticket holder at all the Philly sports teams, and I had a really close contact at the Flyers, which is our NHL affiliate. And she reached out to her counterpart at the Eagles, and they sprung into action and created this amazing day. Literally got like a nurse and sent a special limo and IVs, and he's on the sidelines and sat in the box with like all the spouses and girlfriends. And after the game, they'd bring him down right outside the locker room. They had asked who his favorite player was, and one by one, every player, 53 guys on an NFL roster, one by one, 53 guys out of the locker room signed a game football for him. Good luck in your fight.
Wow.
Last guy out of the locker room was the guy he identified as his favorite player. He takes off his game worn jersey over a suit and tie, signs it, spends like 20 minutes with them. And so they leave and go on their separate ways. And, we think, that at least he's going to had one final experience before he passes away. And he was really sick. We had pictures from it. He was like, you could tell he was really, really struggling. And so that was that. And, on we go. And about 2 weeks later, Vern Harnish from Scaling Up called me. And he had known about Dream On, and he said, "Hey, how's that Dream On program going?" I'm like, "Vern, we just had one that was like, just rocked me to my core." I told him the whole story. And Vern said, and you got to know Vern well to really appreciate this, but he's on the board at Reardon Clinic. They're like a integrated medicine kind of doing a lot of research in sort of alternative therapies and stuff. And Vern said, "Did you say Hodgkin's disease?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, is he a firstborn son? And I go, "I don't know. He's the employee, like he's my employee's husband. I've never met him." He goes, "Well, you have to find out. But more importantly, does he have an unresolved issue with his dad?" And I go, "The hell am I supposed to know? I don't even know if he's firstborn." He said, "Well, research just came through Reardon that firstborn sons with unresolved paternal conflicts have like this massive elevated risk of developing Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." And I'm like, "Huh?" So he goes, "Well, just find out." So I called Jackie, who's been with me 11 years, so I can ask these questions. I said, "Jackie," she's like, "It was amazing. Thank you so much." I go, "I have two really weird questions. Just bear with me." I said, "Is Dan a firstborn son?" And she said, "Yeah, he's got two younger sisters." I go, "All right, here comes the weird question. Does he have an unresolved issue with his dad?" She goes, "Oh my God, how do you know about that?" I go, "Well, I don't know about it, but tell me about it." And she goes, "Yeah, he had this massive fight with his dad, and they weren't speaking, and his dad had a heart attack and passed away, and they had this unresolved conflict, and
Wow.
he's like torn up about it." I'm like, "All right, well, here's the deal." And I lay out all the research, and I go, "Well, at the very least, let's just get him into therapy like now. So at least if he is going to pass away, he passes away like in peace. Like he shouldn't take this with him." So we get him into therapy a couple days a week, 2, 3 days a week. And this is like October. And so he goes back to the doctor in January, and the doctor did what all great Western medicine doctors that can't understand anything other than standard of, sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way.
Yeah.
I'll just, no narrative for me. The doctor said, "Dan, we have to apologize. We can't find any trace of Hodgkin's, and we think we misdiagnosed you from the beginning." Now, I can show you the picture with the football and the guys signing it, and you could give it to a 4-year-old and they could tell you that he was on death's
He
door.
was sick.
He was dying. I mean, full on dying. And this was 2008. What is it? 2025. He just celebrated his 43rd birthday, I think, his 25th wedding anniversary, like, or whatever it is. Yeah, still going, super, like, never looked back. And I'm not saying we saved his life in any way, shape, or form, but I'm saying we took a guy who was at the depths of despair and gave him a little bit of hope. And he did the work. He healed himself however he healed himself. But he was given a 10% chance to survive, and you're probably not going to make Christmas. And that was over 2 decades ago. So
Amazing.
I think we kind of forget, and it's what I alluded to earlier. We are so unbelievably lucky to live the lives that we live and to be on an entrepreneurial journey and have that level of freedom and independence. And I don't care if you work 80 hours a week. You make your own choices as an entrepreneur about what you want to work on and what you don't and what you get to do and what everything. And that comes at an unbelievable price. And that unbelievable price is we need to do everything in our power to make the people that show up to help us do that like the stars of the show. Like we have to honor their commitment. We don't have to like them or love them or, Joe Polish from Genius Network asked me at the end of an amazing interview one time. He goes, "John, all this culture stuff sounds great, but what if you just don't like people?" And he was totally being a smart ass, and it was classic Joe. And I paused for a second and I laughed, thinking to myself, we just had a great interview. Why would you ask this dumb question? And I said to him, I go, Joe, I know you were being a smart ass and, this was supposed to be funny. I go, but it's actually the right question. You don't have to like people. You certainly don't have to love people. But if you can't honor the fact that they're showing up for you and your vision and your dreams, then you don't deserve to be an entrepreneur. You don't have the right to be an entrepreneur. It's your privilege and your responsibility to do anything you can to honor their commitment to you. Like, that's just fundamental reciprocity. And it turned out to be a really cool moment in the interview, even though it was totally meant to be a gotcha at the end and smart ass question. But yeah, I believe that. And there's different theories. I'm an employee first, customer second guy. No one will ever convince me differently. I know all the rationale for customer first. I know all the rationale for everyone's equal. I know all the rationale for stakeholder first and community. But for me, it's employee first. Everything else is second. And if you get that right, amazing things happen and fall into place. So, all right, that was super long-winded, Jeff, but that's my bias around culture.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that story and that answer. I've just got a couple of things, and I want to target this directly to entrepreneurs. We have 260 franchise owners. 240 of them have been in business with us less than 24 months. We're one of the fastest growing platforms in North America. One of the things we talk about and we teach is this concept of speaking a bold future into existence. And Cheshire Cat said it great. The great consultant Cheshire Cat said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And it is incumbent upon the owner, the founder, the visionary, whatever you want to call it, to clearly document and articulate by every small detail that you can possibly what this future is going to look like, what it's going to mean for the people that are involved, how you're going to do it, the big things, the little things. One of the things that I share a story that I sat down with a guy for 4 hours in 1995, and I described to him in great detail what was going to happen, building our business, 1,000 trucks, this many markets, all of that. And ultimately, 25 years later, it came exactly true. One of the things I said was we were going to have an orange citrus smell coming out of our tailpipes. So at intersections and in people's driveways that we would be touching all of their senses. And I never get, the APA stifled me on that one. I was not allowed to do that. But other than that, I mean, with great clarity and consistency, like we built the future that we described. So talk to even a startup business owner, a young person, a new to business person, like in simple terms, how do you speak a bold future into existence? How do you document it and how do you use it?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of two ideas on that front because I've made them both work really well for me. The first one happened, I read the E-Myth in 1997 or 8 or something. And in the E-Myth, which I think is actually one of the most important business books ever written for early stage entrepreneurs, the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. So he talks about in there your strategic aim, and he wants you to write a 7-year look ahead of exactly what in first person, and this is the key, first person present tense as if it's already happened. And that theme's going to go in both of these stories. So I write my strategic aim, 7-year look ahead, same thing in massively specific detail. We're in an embroidered denim shirt, and this is what the offices look like, and this is our technology, but all the things. Meanwhile, we're one location at the time losing money, and I write we're 15 locations and this revenue and this level of profitability, and I'm thinking, this is all utter nonsense. Like, none of this is going to happen. But I did the exercise. Why the hell not? And we ended up stuffing that in a drawer, and we found it like in a clean out 6 years later. I'd forgotten I ever even had done it. And we pull it out at the 6.5-year mark. And it was literally like I was Nostradamus and predicted the future. We had 17 offices, not 15. We were wearing the exact shirt that I thought. We had the exact customer, like everything. It was bananas that it all had like come to fruition. My current method that I've been doing for a decade now is an idea from a guy named Brian Scudamore, the founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK. It's called
Right.
Painted Picture.
Right.
Brian suggests you do it 3 years in advance. I do it 1 year because I'm not smart enough to think 3 years in advance. But I literally will, on the first week of January, I will write in unbelievably vivid detail as if it's New Year's Eve of that year. First person, present tense. I'm talking to myself about what an unbelievable year we had. And I write it from the framework of perfection. So this is really important for me. So that literally we had an impossibly perfect year. My litmus test is if more than half of what I put in my painted picture actually came true, I didn't think big enough for that year. Now, why would I do that? Because interestingly, in years 2 and 3, the 50% that didn't come true in year 1 often happens in years 2 and 3. So every year I write that like wildly exaggerated vision of the year as if it's happened on New Year's Eve. And I'm not like, I'm sitting by a fire, having a scotch or smoking a cigar. Like I write it like that. Like, as I gaze into the fire on this amazing New Year's Eve, like that level of like putting yourself, like visually imagining you're in that place and it's all happened. But that's the key, is write it like so over the top that nobody could ever question you on it because it's obviously like based in massive hyperbole, but B, as if it's already true, and magic just starts to happen from there. I've been doing it for 10 years. Again, this is one of those, no one will ever talk me out of it being a good idea. That's my method. That's how I do it. And they end up being 15 to 20 pages long. And there's a section on our website and our marketing department and our sales process and like all the different things. And now I do it personally and professionally, but at the very least, do it for the business. I think it's one of the most powerful things you can teach.
Yeah, it's where it all begins. It's where it all begins. One last question I'd like you to speak to, targeted towards entrepreneurs. You mentioned YPO, EO, CEO. I'm a YPOer. I'm a CEOer. I'm a strategic coacher. I'm a genius networker. I mean, at some point when my career changed trajectory when I joined Vistage, and I got around a chair who had built Husqvarna North America, and he poured into me over 9 years and basically just changed the slope of my line. Dave Zierfoss, incredible founder, incredible leader of a $530 million business and largest, big outdoor power equipment company, and through dealerships. So me building through franchising, it was perfect. And then getting into YPO, which then informed my thinking on I could sell this business, and actually there would be, my identity didn't have to go with it. I could still be me, and I could still do, and I would have enough gas in the tank at 50 to be able to do something else. And I don't know what it would be, but it could be of my own design. And then getting into CEO and strategic coach, and now Genius Network. It's this power of the network. So on Align 5's website, I saw masterminds and I saw retreats. When is it too early for founders of businesses to engage in masterminds and retreats? Is that something they should do from day one? How do they choose? And then how do you use those tools within your business to help entrepreneurs scale their business?
Yeah. So obviously a lot of facets to that question, but I feel really strongly that if you're cut out for it, that the ultimate journey in life is the journey of the entrepreneur. You're totally responsible for the outcomes you create. You have total autonomy and freedom over your time. Again, even if you're working 80-hour weeks, they're your 80 hours to do the things you want to do your way. And that creates unbelievable opportunity, but it also creates an island of unbearable loneliness. You can't talk to your friends. My two best friends growing up, one's a school teacher and one's an attorney. They think I'm a cartoon character. Now, I'm a fun cartoon character because we've done lots of cool stuff together because we have the resources to do it. But I can't talk to them about, what it's like to fire somebody, what it's like to miss payroll. And They just don't have the frame of reference. So your world gets really, really lonely. And as you scale, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So first and foremost, just knowing that you're not alone and being in community with other lunatics that chose this path is really powerful. I also feel really strongly that if I can hear from people that have made mistakes ahead of me and learn from their mistakes and not have to learn the lessons the painful way, which is making them myself, that's like the ultimate productivity hack. Like, hey, we tried that thing that you are totally going to try 11 times and it broke 11 out of 11 times. And here's the 93 ways that it broke and 4 things to think about and 1 thing to absolutely, no matter what, not do. Why not have the opportunity to hear from someone like that? I also now, and it's funny, I got the question years ago because I'm in all the coach, genius, YPO, EO. I was really active. I was president of my industry, trade associations, users groups. Like I was like 40 days a year of personal development at one point.
Right.
Somebody asked me, like, what could you possibly be getting from all this personal development? And it was a great question, and I hadn't really contemplated it because it was like, probably $500,000+ a year just in spend.
What was your answer?
And
I know mine. What was yours?
so I got really clear on the idea that the most important skill we can have as an entrepreneur is our creativity. And creativity, to me, comes from pattern recognition. And I looked at all those different opportunities to be in all those rooms with all those people as the chance to like hyper accelerate the number of patterns I could ingest. So if I hear from you in the, the dryer, washer and dryer repair industry about 6 things you made mistakes on, I see those patterns and I can translate how those patterns fit me and the restaurant business and the sales organization and services, all the different things. I'm ingesting all those different patterns and I'm informing my gut so that I make better next decisions when I'm confronted with challenges because my gut's been so well informed. And now I think as the world splits into like we're outsourcing a lot of our community and, personal interaction to technology through AI and other things, I actually think we're amplifying the value of being in person and just the energetic exchange between 2 people in physical proximity versus screen to screen or if I hear one more person say my AI agent's going to talk to your AI agent and they're going to negotiate, that's fantastic. But that certainly isn't going to fill my soul from a community and a connectedness standpoint.
Right.
So I'm going to seek those things out even more. So I actually think the value of in-person is actually on an upward trend, not a downward trend because of what we're doing on the technology side. But yeah, so I feel really strongly you have to inform your gut, you have to ingest the patterns, and you have to be in physical proximity with each other because it's lonely as hell being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. For me, it helps me stay out of my own way. It helps me keep me from making my world too small by trying to control it. It continues to just stretch me. I mean, it's like when I go to a Genius Network meeting, my head's just pulled apart and it's open. And maybe it is patterns. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I know that when I joined YPO and after several years and participating in leadership there and then just understanding people's journeys, everybody had sold a business and that business was broader than just my business. And, it really stretched me and changed me in that way. And then after that, I seek every room that I can afford to be in, or I want to be around the most interesting people that I can possibly get around. Anybody wrapped up inside of themselves makes a very small package. And, we expand when we think expansively and we can leverage other people's thinkings to help us do that. And I just love it. I'm a junkie. I'm a curiosity junkie. I get so excited. I get so excited when I hear people speaking at those meetings or a doctor this, or it all translates.
Like, it all translates.
It all translates. Awesome. All right. So this has been amazing, John. I've got a curveball and a fastball for you. And are you ready for the curveball? Can you hit a curveball, by the way?
If it breaks more than 20 inches top to bottom, we'll see. But no,
All right.
yeah, fire away. I think I got it.
All right, here it comes.
Although I don't know what you're going to say. So,
Well, gun to your head, something you care about, incredibly at risk. You have to start a business in 30 days, and it's not something that you are currently active in. Based on your perspective and view of the world as it is, what would that business be? Take your time.
yeah. So, leaning into that theme of, I do think community matters. I actually, and I love when every trend in business goes one way and you go the other way. When you started, one of the things I wanted to kind of interject is I'm a micro economist, so I look at macroeconomic trends only to kind of like inform me at a high level. But I believe in any market as a microeconomist, you can find your niche and your way. So I would probably want to be in some form of brick and mortar style community based business. And I'm kind of simple when it comes to like how I think about the world. And the obvious answer here is, I want to be the first AI solopreneur to build $1 billion business. I just don't like that, just doesn't light me on fire. So I would want to have some sort of community based, I was in Omaha for the Berkshire meeting last week, and Omaha has these, and I don't even know what the heck they are, but they're like indoor miniature golf, kind of think like, you know, like upscale bar, miniature golf, like entertainment center, and they're thriving in every way, and they're
Yes.
expanding and growing them. So some form of business where you can actually bring people together in some novel way around community and just create an escape. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. That's probably not the billion or $1 trillion idea, but if you're a early stage founder entrepreneur and you want to find a niche that me, and I'm a blue ocean, not red ocean guy for sure, something that brings people together in community where you can really amplify that in-person experience, I think is going to get more and more and more valuable as we go. And I also believe brick and mortar is going to be less and less and less expensive as the world kind of splits. So there's something about the retail in-person experience that has always lit me up.
Yeah, history always repeats itself. Some things come back. It may be in a slightly different shape or different form, but at the end of the day, we're tribal, and
Yeah,
we'll revert
100%.
we'll revert back to that mean. Awesome.
It's why pickleball is cleaning tennis's clock, because it's a much more social,
Yes.
engaging, kind of easy to produce, put communities together, skill levels, all the things. Like that, you need look no further than that trend right there, that people want to be together in ways that are socially rewarding,
Yeah.
not necessarily, physically overwhelming and
You
taxing.
can't you
So
can't I've you can't put tequila in the handle of a tennis racket, but you can in the handle of a pickleball racket.
exactly.
So there
I
you go.
like it.
A subtle but significant difference in those two sports. John, how can people get in touch with you before I throw this one right down the middle?
Yeah. So my email is really simple. It's jratliff, RATLIFF, at ALIGN, and then the number 5.com. That's probably the best way. I'm happy to share my cell phone. You can pop that up, whatever works best. But yeah, jratliff at align5.com would be the simplest.
Yeah, any entrepreneur, any size, go to the website. There are things there for you, if not now, in the future, but there's a lot of wisdom that is aggregating around John Ratliff. All right, here we go. If you had one sentence to make an impact in somebody's life, what would that be?
It would be a quote from my dad. And that quote was, true happiness comes from improving the experience of others. I put that quote in every talk that I give on cold. I put it in every talk that I do. I say it all the time. True happiness comes from improving the experience of others.
Perfectly said, John. Thanks for being on today. This has been so awesome.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
I'm Jeff Dudan. We've been here with John Ratliff, and we have been on the Homefront. Thanks for listening.